All right, section 9.2 deals with this concept of a quadratic, and we're going to want to actually solve these quadratics. So since this is an intro, we do have a bunch of vocab we have to do. The first off being, what is a quadratic equation? Well, a quadratic equation is going to be any equation you're dealing with where the highest exponent in the equation is x squared. So what I mean by that is when you look at an equation, if the highest term we have, or the highest exponent is an x squared, then we can go ahead and say, hey, we're solving a quadratic. In order to solve quadratics, one way to do it is to take a square root. So we need to know what a square root is. Square root is when you have this symbol right here, so radical. We're taking the square root of x. We're asking ourselves what number multiplied by itself will give you that value. And it could be any number we're dealing with, or letter for that matter. So example here would be square root of 49. As soon as you see that, you're asking yourself what times itself gives me 49. In this case, it happens to be 7. Here I listed out the perfect squares from 1 to 13. So there they are for you. So that's just if I have 1 squared is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, so on and so forth. You'll notice every single one of these you can take the square root as well. So you should be becoming familiar with those values as well. So jumping right into examples. Example 1, we're just doing basic multiplication here. As you can see, I already did on the left-hand side. 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16. The thing I want to pay attention to, though, is over here on the right. If I have a negative 1 times negative 1, it also gives me a positive 1. Notice how those are the same. If I do negative 2 times negative 2, it's going to give me a positive 4. Once again, it's the same as if I just did 2 times 2. If I do negative 3 times negative 3, it's going to give me a positive 9. And then negative 4 times negative 4 gives me a positive 16. So when you look at these, there are 2 ways to multiply a number by itself and get the same value. You have to worry about both the positive and negative. So what that tells us is that when we are solving an equation by taking a square root, we have to make sure that we include both of these solutions. Okay? We have to include both the positive and the negative. And the way we would notate that is drawing a plus and a minus sign right on top of each other. Okay, that tells us that we're including both the plus and the minus. So an example of that would be like, let's say I took the square root of 4. Square root of 4 is 2, so I would put the plus or minus 2 out front. And then now we're just going to get into solving. So in order to solve an equation with x squared, you must take the square root of both sides. And we need to make sure that x is by itself. Example 2 is the easiest one we'll run into. You have x squared equals 4. You look at it, there's nothing outside the x squared. It's all by itself. So you can go ahead and square root each side. Doing that is going to give me x equals plus or minus 2. Okay. You need to make sure when you take the square root, you include the plus or minus. Now, on the next page, these are where things get like a little more tricky, but not too tricky. Look right here. First question you ask is x squared by itself. X squared is by itself, so you can go ahead square root left, square root right, get x equals. Square root of 64 is going to give me 8. And then you need to make sure to include the plus or minus because we took a square root. Right here, x squared, square root, x equals square root of 16, 4. And then make sure you include the plus or minus. One thing that you're gonna have to watch out for are negative numbers, okay? For this one on the top right, the x squared is by itself, so I'm gonna try to take the square root of each side. But you should start thinking, okay, square root of a negative number. What times itself will give me a negative number? It turns out that you can't do it. You cannot take the square root of a negative number because nothing multiplied by itself will be negative. So we can say it does not exist. If you were on your calculator, We could go ahead and take the square root of a negative number. You could go blue, and then x squared, type in negative 25. You do it, you get an error message. Okay, it tells you it's a non-real answer. If you get that message, just tells us, hey, it doesn't exist. Can't do it. Moving on. Next row. You look at that. The x squared is not by itself. So when the x squared is not by itself, you need to get it by itself first. So the first thing we do here is divide each side by 6. And we get x squared equals 9. At this point, we can go ahead and square root because the x is by itself. It'll give us x equals plus or minus 3. Middle, you go ahead and add 14 each side. Okay, so this is stuff we were doing back in September. Get x squared equals 16. Square root left, square root right. X equals plus or minus 4. Here, you got 2 steps to do before you can square root. You have to minus the 10 over, giving us 2x squared equals 98 by 2. X squared equals 49. And then now that the square root is by itself, you square root each side, get x to equal plus or minus 7. Okay, much of the same down here. You go ahead and subtract 6 from each side. Negative 4x squared equals negative 400. There's still something outside the x squared, so I have to go ahead and divide each side by negative 4. Giving me x squared equals 100. Square root, x equals plus or minus 10. Okay, parentheses are where like some people struggle. As soon as they throw parentheses in, we're thinking, okay, is there anything outside the parentheses on the left-hand side in this case? So I look at it, there's nothing outside. Since there is nothing outside, you go ahead, square root each side. It's going to leave me with x plus 2 equals plus or minus 9. Okay, we still haven't solved for x. What you need to do on this problem is literally break it into both a positive 9 and a negative 9. Okay, so you have x plus 2 equals 9, x plus 2 equals negative 9. And we go ahead and solve. So subtracting 2 from each side, I'm going to get x equals 7. Subtract 2 from each side, x equals negative 11. So we get 2 answers right there. Over here, nothing outside the parentheses, square root each side. So we get 2x minus 1 equals plus or minus 7. Just like we did in the last one, you need to break it. And then solve. So 2x equals 8. Give me x equals 4. 2x equals negative 6. Divide x equals a negative 3. Okay, so those are all perfect, and in theory, those are ones you should be able to do in your head. They're not always going to work out perfectly, though, so that's where a calculator would come into play. So these next 3, using a calculator, you're just typing it in. So we have x equals the square root of 15, plus or minus, actually. Just type in your calculator. The second square root is above the x squared, so second x squared, type in 15. We get this long decimal here. They want it rounded to the nearest hundredth, which is the second decimal place. So I look at it. If I write like the whole thing out, it's 3.87298. Like it just keeps going on. Hundredth is the second, so I look to the right. 2 is less than 5. It's going to leave me at 3.87. If the number to the right is 5 or greater, then we're bumping this number up 1. But since that's not the case, we're good. Middle one, you got to get the x squared by itself, so you add 7 each side. 2x squared equals 16. Divide by 2. X squared equals 8. And then now we can finish it up. Hold on. Going back to the previous one. It should be plus or minus. Make sure you include the plus or minus. This one, square root 8. It's going to give me plus or minus 2.83. So this is what I was talking about. When I look to the right, 8 is greater than 5, so we're going to bump this up one. Give me 2.83. Okay, last one. Go ahead, divide each side by 3. X squared equals negative 7. You cannot square root a negative number, so we are done. We say it does not exist. Remember, on your calculator, when you plug that in, square root negative 7, it gives you an error. It flat out tells you it's a non-real answer. So that is it for section 9.2.